Hey guys, EST here, back with another great video, and this is your ultimate crash course to gardening if you know nothing about it. This is like how not to completely screw up your garden. So let's say a scenario happens where it would be a very wise idea for you to grow your own food. Well, that's a problem because if you're not already into gardening, you have no idea what you're doing, which means you're probably going to kill everything. Well, I've compressed all the gardening knowledge that you could possibly want to know into a 30-minute video. Sort of. So if you're ever basically forced into becoming a gardener against your will, there's probably a better way to phrase that. This is how not to screw it up, how to be successful because, well, if you're not just doing it for fun, you're doing it for food, you really need it to work. This is obviously a fantastic video for anybody who wants to start gardening for any reason at any time. Now, when I picked up gardening as a hobby because I finally moved out from an apartment to a house, I just did it because it's fun and to improve my diet and because why not? And to practice for, getting good at it in case of an emergency. And food supply disruptions are a thing. In fact, a weather event, like fuel prices, economic stuff, climate change, a labor dispute, a war, anything can cause a food disruption. So it's really good to know how to grow your own food. Now, I probably watched a couple hundred hours of gardening instructional stuff and tips and that kind of, stuff on YouTube, and I got quite good at gardening. But honestly, you could probably get 50 to 70% of the way there just by watching this one video. I'm just going to blow through everything about how not to screw up your garden. So if you don't do the things that I tell you not to do in this video, you should be fine. Stuff should grow fairly okay. You're still not going to have a beautiful, flawless garden with no pests and no failures, but you'll be better off than some people who have even had a garden for multiple years and just screwed up every single year and just have problems with stuff dying and pests every single year. So first, let's talk about seeds, which is the biggest issue. Why would you have seeds on hand if you don't garden? And then you might say, oh, well, I'll just go pick some up and then I'll just, put them in a mason jar, oxygen free, heat stabilize them, aka keep them in the basement, and I'm good. I'll just pop them out when I need them, right? I'll keep them dry. I'll keep them, climate controlled. Okay, cool. But seeds are only designed to run for 1 year. They just are. If you keep your seeds over 1 year, they're going to dry out. The oil compounds on the inside are going to break down. The complex nutrients are going to break down. And the seed viability will drop. They found some kind of grain seeds in some Egyptian tomb and actually managed to grow them because it's so dry there. So, sometimes seeds last 6,000 years. But what I would say is don't get the off-the-shelf stuff, the $2.99, which are now like $4.99. What happened? Jeez. Packs of seeds at the gardening stores. And, I like the hardware stores because, those are paper. They're hard to store. Who knows how long they had them in storage, either the manufacturer or the store themselves. And like I said, those prices are outrageous. I would go to, there's so many good seed sellers out there. I like Victory Seeds. Shout out, not sponsored. I just really like them. They only sell heirlooms, not hybrids. Hybrids, when they grow and then go to seed, if they even do, the seeds aren't viable. They're sterile. They won't grow anything. So if you grew hybrid corn and then saved the kernels, dried them, and then, planted them the next year, nothing will grow. Or you'll get some really wacky plant that doesn't look like corn. So get heirloom seeds. That's number one. And then two, if you just overbuy, they are quite literally 5 to 10 times cheaper to buy seeds from like Victory Seeds or really any seller that's respectable than it is to get the traditional off-the-shelf stuff. So if you overbuy, you can then overplant. And then if you're down to like 10% seed viability because they're like 3, 4, 5 years old, something will still come up. So this video is like the rapid fire lightning round of gardening, but I wanted to spend some time talking about seeds because that is the most important. Without good seeds, you are going nowhere. So I would say pick some up, pick up seeds that are notorious for long shelf lives. You can find charts and personal accounts and scientific studies about viability of seeds and like viability loss per year and that kind of stuff. But even just like dried beans, I've heard of them sprouting after a couple years, as big as they are. They're very big, very complex and a lot of stuff inside of them that can go wrong. But they're still pretty decent at sprouting. I've used ones that are 3 years old and I didn't have any problem with any of them sprouting. So seeds are not generally considered to be long-term storage friendly, but if X amount of them go bad and then the absolute healthiest, hardest shell ones still work, then just overplant them. And whatever ones are viable, they'll sprout. And then you just very aggressively thin them out. So next up, let's talk about soil, where to plant, because that's the next thing that you could screw up. Just basically not clay. You get all this stuff about pH and this and that and whatever. Most soil is neutral. Most soil is fine. What you don't want is clay, because the roots don't like it. It just doesn't retain water, or it does retain water to the extreme. It's very nutrientless. The best thing you can do is take like compost, very heavily shredded compost. In fact, like a compost pile compost, is in it already turned into compost, not just chunks of wood, and mix that in, and still it'll be kind of crap, but you can improve it like over time. But it's, where are you going to get compost? So what I would do is maybe wherever you're thinking about putting in an emergency garden in case of an emergency, just check the soil, make sure it's dark colored, black, kind of fluffy, and just not clay. Clay is really the one thing you just absolutely need to avoid. Everything else, something will grow in it. On the very back of my backyard, I've got very clay heavy soil, and then in the front and around the lawn, I have very good black soil. So that's where I grow stuff. Raised garden too is the thing. If you can find really good solid soil from elsewhere and somehow transport it back, dump that, there you go. And then you just basically put up some wood barriers, 2x4s, whatever, and then just get it 6 to 8 inches off the ground, bare minimum. Then you're in control of the soil, and it's all good. So don't try to grow in clay. And you can tell it's clay if you like grab it, and you can leave like finger imprints in it. It isn't like fluffy. It isn't like a sponge. I mean, you guys know what clay is. It's basically Play-Doh. Next up, I mentioned compost. That's the best way to get nutrients into your soil without synthetic fertilizers. So grass clippings, leaves, shredded small wood, whatever you can throw on the compost pile, throw on the compost pile. It helps to mix it every 1 to 2 weeks. Just kind of flip it, fluff it. You need enough oxygen, otherwise it's going to break down more slowly and smell. That's anaerobic bacteria that doesn't like oxygen. That'll start making it slimy. It'll break it down. It's just so much slower and smellier. Why do it? So you want to keep it fluffy. Don't let it dry out too much, or the bacteria that are breaking stuff down will die, and worms are good. So usually to get really good compost, if you do it right and get the good mix and shred it properly, don't use grass clippings that'll mat down into like a mush that seals away water and just screws the whole thing up. Keep it light, keep it fluffy, keep it aerated, keep it flipped, and keep it sufficiently wet but not flooded. Really, like 3 to 6 months, you'll see really good solid compost, where if you mix it like 50-50 with any soil, even 1/3 to 2/3, you will just see amazing results, because usually compost isn't fully broken down. You'll still get you'll get larger chunks into very small chunks, but they're still not completely obliterated, and they'll continue to break down while they're in the ground. So usually if you get good compost, you can be good for multiple years, believe it or not. That soil will have, nitrogen constantly going into it, carbon, potassium, whatever else it needs. So always, 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 always have a compost pile, because if you get barren soil that just is lacking in nutrients, nothing will grow all of a sudden, and you're months away from having compost. So always have compost. Doesn't need to be a fancy bin with like a turner and all that. Doesn't need to, be all caged up in a nice fence and all this other stuff. It could just be a pile. Look, if it's an emergency situation, it doesn't have to be pretty. It doesn't have to be tidy. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to work. Now you might say, oh, but the Pilgrims learned that if you take fish heads and bury them under your corn, yeah, okay. I mean, then there's like eggshells and, coffee grounds, but those are acidic, and then the eggshells cannot break down quickly enough. And there's all these weird things, dead animals and, cow manure, obviously, but then, boy, watch out for that E. coli. I mean, there's other things you can use as fertilizer, but just plants that you just got around, just leaves, just whatever. Go to some field, cut a bunch of long grass, weeds, and invasive species, and then just turn that into compost. Find some dead and dying dried branches on something, cut them up, chip them up, shred them pretty good, and then throw that in there. That's more easy. And I will say anything brown and anything wood tends to be carbon, and then anything very highly green and thin, like leaves, like leafy stuff, I should say, plant stems, grass, that's heavy nitrogen. So you want about 50-50 mix. So if you have like an all nitrogen mix, you're probably going to nitrogen burn your plants, and then they won't have any other nutrients. So you do want a variety of things going in, not just all the same thing. But I will say, even little tiny branches, they can take years to break down. So if you have like a wood chipper, great. In an emergency, you probably don't. So you might want to take just some snips, some gardening shears, and just chop them up into much smaller pieces. The smaller you can physically separate them first, the bigger the jump start you get, and a higher surface area for bacteria to start, getting in and breaking it down into smaller pieces. And, worms can eat it better. And it's just, you'll give it, a 1 to 2 to 3 year head start. So do that. So seed and soils, very, very, very important. Next, let's move on to watering. This is how everybody kills their garden. I am telling you right now, if somebody said I tried gardening and it all died, it's because they screwed this up. Luckily, this is so much simpler. Watch, I'm going to cover this in probably 30 seconds. Number one, does it need water? Stick your finger down into the soil, and if you hit wet anything, don't water it. So surface, who cares? 3 inches down, is it moist? If it is, don't water it. If it isn't, water it. That's it. When you water it, don't get the plant wet, if at all possible. Now you're probably saying, but rain. Yeah, well, okay, you can only control so much. Rain only happens what? Once a week, a couple times a month. It can handle that. What you don't want is, I go out to water my garden every other day or every third day or whatever, depending upon how dry it is. And they're wet, and then they're wet, and then they're wet, and they're wet, and the leaves are wet. You're just going to get mold on them. You're going to get powdery mildew, and they're going to die. So don't get the plant wet. And then 2, I'm not kidding, don't get the plant wet, as in don't splash up water from the soil onto the leaves or onto the plant or whatever. So don't just stand above it, blast it, and just absolutely bombard the soil, and then little drops are bouncing off the soil onto the leaves. You're going to get bacteria and mold spores onto the plant, and it is going to die. Turn the hose on as low as possible. Get a sprayer head that's very, very light, or like a soak thing, not like a jet. And if you can, get one of those extended watering arms that's kind of like a shower head, where it comes out pretty softly, and then you can really just aim it right on the soil. I mean, we're talking maybe a 1/4 inch above the soil, and just I hate to say spray it, dribble it from there. So if all your plants died and you were attacked by nonstop mold and insects and everything, it's probably because you did one of those 2 things wrong. And also, if you keep soaking the soil over and over and over, you're going to get mold growth all over, and the mold spores are going to float up onto the plant and kill it. Or you'll just straight up get root rot. You'll be flooding out all the worms, you'll be attracting really bad decomposing style stuff and anaerobic bacteria. None of that you want in your garden. So don't overwater. It will be really obvious from the look of the plant if you underwater. Use the finger test anyway to prevent from getting to a drastic scenario. And don't get the plant wet, and don't splash up contaminated soil water onto it. I feel like that was longer than 30 seconds, but still, very, very, very important. Next up, in preventing disease, because diseases and pests will kill your plants. That is why most people give up gardening, is because everything just died and everything got out of control, and they didn't want to spray it with harmful pesticides and stuff. So one thing you can do is lower leaves, and just leaves that aren't in opportune locations. The plant will selectively kill them off, because why invest nutrients and water and all that stuff into a leaf that's out of the sunlight, or is too low, or is touching the ground, or is up against the wall of your garden, or a brick, or just whatever. The plant next to it, whatever. So you'll see leaves just shrivel and die, and it could even be pest damage. It could have been something took a bite out of it, whatever. But every couple days, just go out, find dead leaves, snip them off, pull them off, whatever, and then move them far away from the garden. They could potentially be dead because they were diseased, contaminated, some kind of mold, some kind of pest, some kind of insect. Maybe there was now eggs on it. If you can, don't throw that into your compost pile. That's the one thing you wouldn't want to put in there, is like dead or damaged leaves or branches or stems or whatever. Maybe the plant selectively killed it off. Maybe they didn't. If you can, just burn them. Or put them very, very, very far away in the, I'm never going to use this soil compost pile. Harmful insects and mold, they will attack the weakest plants. That's how nature works in nature. That's how it regulates itself. If something isn't doing very well, it needs to be taken out, and something stronger needs to be put in its place, basically. So if your plant isn't doing well because of, lack of nutrients, overwatering, underwatering, lack of sunshine, whatever, if it starts to get unhealthy, boom, all of a sudden it's going to get attacked and not be able to healthily fend off whatever it is. Because believe it or not, plants kind of do have immune systems. But if they're already struggling just to survive, they're going to succumb to, everything. And, mold and even insects are kind of like programmed to go after the weaker plants, because if they constantly killed the healthiest plants, the whole ecosystem would collapse and they wouldn't have a place to live anymore. So that's how nature regulates itself, so keep that in mind. So what you want to do is, if you've got a dead or dying plant, get rid of it, because it'll attract bad things. And the dead and dying parts of the plants, like I said, the dry, shriveling leaves and all that, get rid of them as quickly as possible. You want nothing but lovely, green, moist, perfect plants and leaves. Next, don't just sit there and grow the same crop over and over and over. They invented crop rotation, a couple thousand years ago? Except you can't just say, we're growing corn this year and we're doing beans the next year. Well, who wants to eat just, nothing but beans one year and corn the next year? You're not just going to not grow corn one year. That's insane. So if you can, just physically move it to a different plot, like if you have just 4 major plots, quite literally rotate them 90 degrees. That's one way to do it, especially if they're separated from each other. Otherwise, if your beans get attacked by spider mites one year, and then you plant beans in the same plot again and they get massively attacked even quicker and on a larger scale by spider mites again, or you grew cucumbers 3 years in a row and the powdery mildew got worse every single year, you're going to have to probably go a bare minimum 100 feet away in just a different plot in slightly different soil, because the colonies of harmful molds, harmful insects, they will build up a colony in that area, do better and better and better every generation, every year, and really attack your plants. So move them physically or just don't plant them that year. Or if you just want to say screw the whole thing, add about 2 inches of extra soil and compost and just whatever on top your beds, basically your farming area, gardening area. And do that like every year, because that'll just like suppress it, add a new ecosystem, add new soil, and it'll just push the stuff lower. That's kind of an emergency tactic, but it works. It's actually something most people do anyway, regardless. They usually put mulch on the top. The mulch kind of breaks down, and then they just put soil and mulch on top again and just keep it, going. And also your garden will just straight up shrink because of the breakdown. If you've got, decomposing, wood scraps and, grass clippings and whatever else really low down in your soil, it will physically get smaller. So your soil level is going to go down every year, so you might as well add some to it, just saying. So either a crop rotation or that or both will keep you from having issues with just pests getting worse and worse and worse. Also, corn likes nitrogen, and beans, I think, also like nitrogen. Onions, they don't care about nitrogen as much. So if you just do corn, you're going to run out of nitrogen in the soil real quick. So that's like the real reason on a farm scale to do crop rotation. The other thing is choose the right location, and I don't just mean for soil. What you want to do is, get up at 6 in the morning. Boy, wouldn't that be fun? Set up a camera or something. Do a time lapse with your cell phone or like a GoPro or something. I don't know, whatever. But you want to know where the sun is at 6 a.m. and then like 8 a.m. and then 10 a.m. and then noon, and then you want to track it the whole time. Obviously, don't do it in the winter. Do it in the spring, summer, or fall, preferably summer. And then you'll find out, my neighbor's tree, my own tree, my garage shades out this thing from, sun up at 5 or 6 in the morning until like 11 o'clock. And then past 11 o'clock, okay, now that section of my yard is out of shadow. If you try to grow corn in something that's shaded out until 11 o'clock, you are going to grow some really small, bad, awful corn. And it'll probably look like it's doing okay. You might think, knee high by the 4th of July. Well, I'm not seeing that, but, okay. I'm not a farmer. These are organic seeds, well, who knows? But really, it's just, okay, as soon as they go to ears, you're going to get like 1 or 2 ears per stalk. They're going to be tiny. They're not going to grow before it freezes, and you're going to get some very disappointing corn. So corn really likes sunlight. Now, don't just completely write off part of your yard because it is partially shaded. There's plenty of stuff that actually almost requires shading. And honestly, beans will grow in just about anything. They grow like crazy. They're super easy. They have a super quick turnaround time. Almost the same with peas, really. I mean, they're just such small plants. They're so aggressive, and they just nitrogen up, blast, and then here, have some beans. I've seen beans sprout in like 30 days. Or sprout. Like, turn into more beans. Grow fully edible beans in like 30 to 40 days. Like, they're that quick. So if they're less than ideal sunlight, okay, maybe 60 days. That's just, it's not that big of a penalty. Now, tomato plants, just think about the sugar and the fruits and how much sunlight it needs to convert, and the volume of leaves versus the weight of the fruit, that kind of logical, just chemistry and physics kind of stuff. Yeah, your tomato plants are going to do awful if they're not in full sun. Now, that said, the sun can actually bake them, it can burn them, and there's little subtle things, but that's the kind of stuff you'll learn about, like how to absolutely optimize your garden. If you were to just grow a tomato plant and just see what happens, it'll probably do pretty okay. It's just, could you have upped the yield 20% by doing this? Yeah, probably, but just use more seeds, use more land, and then, oh no, I suboptimally grew these and now the yield is down 10%, and then I planted 50% more plants, so who cares? If you can, though, put everything that doesn't absolutely die in direct sunlight in as much direct sunlight as possible. So in certain types of bad scenarios, you might not have access to unlimited water. The best irrigation, for lack of a better term, system would be a couple rain barrels on your gutters or on your downspouts collecting from the roofs. Even then, they're going to get down to 0. You're probably going to need more water than, just 1 or 2 barrels can have. So how do you conserve water? Well, you want to cover any exposed soil in mulch. And what is mulch? Well, it's pretty much anything. I use shredded cypress. I think it's bark. Maybe it's shredded cypress wood. I don't know, whatever. Shredded cypress something. A lot of people use shredded straw. That's big. basically fine shredded wood chips. You just really don't want to use like fallen leaves or grass clippings because they can mat down and become like kind of slimy and won't let water through. So you want them to block, sunlight so that water doesn't constantly evaporate off of the first couple inches of your dirt, but you don't want it to completely suffocate the soil. You do need it to, breathe and evaporate a little bit. If you absolutely have to, resort to living mulch, which is just really, really short plants. And, they grow a couple inches tall and they'll cover the soil and kind of shade it out. The problem is they take nutrients, their roots, take room, and they are going to take some water themselves. Also, you want the mulch to be a couple inches, I think at least like 3 inches away from the stems of like everything to prevent them from rotting and certain other things. Just bad things can happen if you mulch it right up to the plant. So you only want to cover the bare soil so that it doesn't just, evaporate, crack, and, a bunch of other bad stuff. But don't mulch up to your plants or they will start to get attacked. So there's only about 2 more things. I mean, if you don't screw up these couple things, you will have a successful garden in all likelihood. I can't really think of anything else that would go wrong except for like flooding, high winds tipping over all your corn. I mean, all this little individual kind of plant species specific stuff. The number one thing that kills gardens is, like I said, pests and mold. Mold is hard, but if you carefully water, keep it in the sunlight, and have ample wind, that's the other thing. Don't put it in a place that's, fences are blocking the wind. Things should dry off. Ultraviolet light should do what it does, and you should be fine. But your garden will have attacks from pests. That will happen. But wait a minute, if you just go walking through a forest or a field or whatever in your area, why doesn't all that stuff get obliterated by, pests? Well, one, you're probably trying to grow something that isn't native to your area. I mean, I would describe 90% of my garden as non-native species to Wisconsin, where I live. So you do that, it's like the pests in your area might really like something and have effectively wiped it out, and now it only grows in other climates where the pests can't, survive. So, okay, good luck with that. Not much you can do other than the tips I already said. But put up a bird bath. Why would putting up a bird bath possibly help anything in your garden? Because it'll attract birds, and they will eat tomato hornworms. They will eat beetle larvae. Birds, I mean, even some squirrels, black squirrels, they like to dig, so I kind of hate them, but they'll eat grubs. They'll eat, larvae that are eating all your stuff subterraneanly. Also, just have a section of just native, who cares, whatever. Just whatever would grow in your area, let it go. Most people call them weeds. I would de-weed it. I would start cutting stuff before it goes to seed. I would, kind of cripple it before you get a weed problem out of control. But, just have basically long grass. What grows in most places is long grass. I wouldn't let like an oak tree go just because an oak seed, fell there. But if you've got like a little 3 foot by 3 foot section of just natural long high grass, native insects like to hide there, and native insects are nicely balanced to eat other harmful insects. If you've just got a garden and that's it, nothing native, you got, 2-inch tall grass, nothing around it, you don't have an ecosystem of native bugs and native plants. So even if, by your fence or whatever, in a strip of your backyard, you do like a 20-foot long strip, 2 feet wide of just whatever's going to grow, let it grow. Even just, letting the grass that's on your lawn grow very, very high. Bugs like to hide in it. They like to, spend the time cooling off in the summer in the shade of it. They like to hide from predators in there, and then they come out at night and eat all your, harmful spider mites. Ladybugs love long grass. Butterflies, they will help pollinate. And that's the other thing is it'll attract pollinators. That's huge, especially if you do let some things that aren't too harmful go to seed, go to flower. Now, dandelions, okay, yeah, I'd still pick them. Edible, by the way, but dandelions propagation rates are ridiculous, and last thing you need is those dandelion seeds floating over to your garden. But some little wildflower that's typically considered a weed, but it's not too bad. Yeah, I'd let it grow. Because it's going to attract pollinators. It's going to attract bees. It's going to attract butterflies, anything else that are native pollinators. Now, corn, that's a wind pollinator. The wind blows, the pollen blows off, it hits the receptors, tada, great. But like beans, tomatoes, those are insect pollinators. So unless you want to spend time, which, feel free to do this manually if you have really, flowers falling off and stuff, and just not getting pollinated in really low yields, take a Q-tip and just, jam it into one flower and put it into another one. That's pretty much how you do it. You just spread the pollen yourself, or like I said, just attract a whole bunch of bugs to your area, because bugs are good. Most of them, at least the overwhelming majority of native bugs are not harmful to a lot of what you're growing. And the ones that are usually taken care of by something higher up on the food chain. So recruit birds and native insects to help control the pest population in your area naturally. And then for everything else, there's neem oil. That's Neem. It comes from, I don't know, neem nuts, seeds. I actually don't know what a neem plant is, but it comes from a neem plant. Neem oil kills everything. Any kind of biting or obnoxious insect, it will kill it. Pollinators, not typically, but it does kill bees. Don't spray it directly on the flowers. Bees don't bite into anything else. Basically, you don't want neem oil on the pollen or nectar from a flower. Anything else, you're fine. But you'd mostly want to target the leaves. So spider mites, gone. Harmful caterpillars and worms and stuff, gone. Although physical removal, they're usually bigger. Just flip over a leaf. If you see eggs, smash them, rub them off the leaf. Physical removal is quite easy for worms and caterpillars. But for tiny little spider mites, what do they call those, little aphids or whatever? I think nematodes are mostly good, but you can get harmful ones. Real small stuff that'll attack your leaves. I mean, you got the white flies. They like to do that. Leaf borers, all that stuff. They will all be killed by neem oil. So you might want to stock that. Now, the shelf life of any oil at all, like cooking oil and whatever, is just a couple years, but it's better than nothing and it'll save an entire garden. So I've had entire crops destroyed by spider mites. I hate those little bastards. I was ready to get out the flamethrower. The other thing you can do is DT earth. It's diatomaceous earth. So just Google DT earth. It's like ground up like fossils or like ancient seashells or it's something. It's like ultra turbo ridiculous abrasive. So try not to breathe in large amounts of it, but basically anything with an endoskeleton, so any insect, will get it caught in their carapace, which is, their shell, and it will like dehydrate them because it'll make little micro nicks in their body, and then all of the water in their body will evaporate and they'll die. And I mean, it's crushed like seashell fossils or whatever, or maybe it's like a crushed algae. I don't know. Whatever it is, it turned into like a thing and then they ground it into a powder and it's about as abrasive as the lunar soil, which has no erosion. I'm not sure that comparison helped literally anybody who doesn't know that lunar regolith is the most like abrasive substance ever. Which, by the way, if you can get some soil from the moon, that'll probably kill some insects too, because that stuff is like sharp. But the next best thing is DT earth, and because it's basically like a powder, I'm pretty sure that stuff has a shelf life of like virtually forever. So a 10-pound bag of that stuff is like $21. So if you leave that around, I mean, I think like a couple cups of it is enough to treat like an entire lawn. Yeah, a little bit longer shelf life than neem oil. So, I mean, if you want reliable long shelf life, good pest control, just leave a bag of that in your garage or your basement or whatever. It's not quite as powerful as neem oil, but it's really, really decent and doesn't harm the soil. AKA doesn't change its pH. So that's it. End of video, right? Although, okay, everything I forgot in this video that people are about to mention in the comment section and anything I come across later, I'm going to put it in the pinned #1 comment by me in the comment section. So might want to scroll down there and everything I missed will be there. But I'm pretty sure I have covered basically gardening 101. Just if you have no idea what you're doing, follow everything I said in this video and you will probably get like a 70, 80, 90% success rate garden on your first try. And now, even if you don't have a garden, when you walk out to get the mail and you see your neighbor watering the garden from 6 feet away by blasting it with a hose, you can tell him, hey, you're getting the leaves wet and splashing up bacteria from the soil onto the plant and they're all going to die. Oh, okay, I'm going to add in one little bonus tip. There is basically no such thing as a healthy cucumber or tomato plant. They are a myth. I'm convinced those two species are borderline suicidal. Literally anything kills a tomato plant. They're extremely susceptible to blight, which is, one of many different fungus species. And powdery mildew is just what is going to happen to cucumber plant leaves eventually. With both of them, you're basically just going to either treat it with neem oil, cross your fingers and try and keep them as dry and in the sunlight as possible and in wind. And then still, you're just mitigating it. You're basically trying to just drag race to, I've got an edible cucumber, I got an edible tomato, before the plant completely dies. So if you've got powdery mildew and mold on your cucumbers and you've got very unhealthy looking, especially lower leaves on a tomato plant, yeah, so do I. So does everybody. Oh, with that and many other plants, I gotta say, no matter what, no matter if they're healthy or not, if you see a little offshoot and a leaf and a branch or a sprig of whatever you want to call it, and it's closer to the ground than about 4 inches, clip it off. First of all, it's not going to get ideal sunlight anyway. The plant's going to give up on it probably in a couple weeks anyway and kill it off. And then 2, that is really close to the soil. Wind, rain, watering, you're going to get that dipped in the soil. Then, all of a sudden now you've got blight on the bottom leaves of your tomato plant. And now it's going to start traveling upward. So a lot of people 12 inches. They will just, as soon as the tomato plant is like a foot high, they'll start clipping off anything that's 3 to 6 inches. And then when it's, a couple feet high or whatever, they will clip off anything that's down to a foot, just to keep the tomato plant as far away from the soil as possible, because they really, really don't like soil contaminants, either bacteria or mold. And the whole don't let it touch the ground thing, I would say that's pretty applicable to quite a few plants, even corn in some cases. If a leaf got damaged or it's dry or it's dying or whatever, and now it's folding over and dragging on the ground, cut it off immediately. That is like a ramp that bad pathogens and bad bugs and bad everything are going to climb to get to the rest of the plant. So that's your last little bonus tip there. But if you want to get into gardening, or you want to just look up, oh, why is it doing this? What does this symptom mean? What did I do wrong here? When you actually try to do a dry run of gardening before you have to. That's what the best gardening channels on YouTube are about, and I found at least 5 of them. You watch whatever suits you, whatever presenter you think is most entertaining or concise or, whatever. Or you could just, look up on the internet, what happens when my leaves turn this color? What's killing my plant now? What about this symptom? And just kind of solve it as it comes. But like I said, this video, this will get you 80-90% of the way there. So thanks for watching. Hey, send this video to anybody who is either a prepper and knows nothing about gardening, or anybody who's thinking about starting gardening, because, it doesn't have to be an emergency. And just FYI, with me knowing not much about gardening and learning as I go, I did one single little garden plot in my backyard, which I put in the wrong place and got heavily shaded out by both of my neighbors' trees for a good half the day. Still, I would say between the carrots, onions, potatoes, corn, beans, peas, really everything together, I probably grew 20 to 40 pounds of food. And boy, it's hard to imagine the dimensions. I think it's 6 feet long by maybe 10 feet wide. So 60 square foot, I got, maybe 30 pounds of food out of it. I've heard of people on a quarter acre growing enough to make that their full-time job, selling it to restaurants and at farmers markets. You'd be surprised what you can cram in if you really, really are careful and know what you're doing. So get out there and try it, or bare minimum, just watch this video and keep the knowledge in your head, maybe take some notes, and have that in case you need it. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next video.